the compliance cost has reached about over 40 billion. Why is it that at a time where financial institutions are increasing their focus, we are still seeing a rise in these kind of issues? What can we do differently?
PayNet is currently managing the National Fraud Portal. We had 20% success where 100% of the reported scam money was recovered.
As long as we have people who are vulnerable, greedy, desperate, scam will always happen.
On Darknet, you can actually buy tools from developers who are not scamsters themselves, but they are developing and then selling those tools so that you can easily go out and conduct scams. So that is definitely very concerning.
I think, a lot of times when I moderate webinars or panels, when we talk about financial crime, fraud, I tend to throw out a lot of statistics. But I think I'm speaking to the choir here. I don't need to remind everyone how dire and how serious of a challenge this is to the market. I guess just yesterday, Bank Negara also announced around 5 million ringgit fines across several banks to illustrate how timely and how important this subject is, right? So let's jump straight into it, gentlemen. Maybe we can start by talking about what you think are the most pressing financial crime threats that's being faced by Malaysian banks today, and if any of the banks are underestimating these challenges. Maybe we'll start with Rohit and then Ken and then back to Azhar.
Thanks, Vincent, and again, thanks for gathering this excellent panel. I definitely agree. This topic is unfortunately, to an extent, very topical today, as it has been for last couple of decades. And I would also start by saying Bank Negara Malaysia in general has been very proactive. They have taken some excellent steps in last few years on tackling financial crime, money laundering, terrorism financing, and so on. But there are still a few gaps. I think Michael earlier mentioned the FATF mutual evaluation for Malaysia is underway. So we would definitely get a better picture once that concludes and once the final report is out. But from what we see, and this is not restricted to Malaysia, so there are significant challenges that still remain. And I'll just speak about a couple of them that we see, again, not just in Malaysia, but across the region, Southeast Asia and broader Asia Pacific. So first one is the supervision and just how much controls are there when it comes to DNFBPs. So the designated non-financial businesses and professions like real estate, lawyers, accountants, jewelers, and so on. So they are, and these have been conduits of a lot of money laundering happening in the past. And unfortunately, they continue to do so. Also because the supervision there is less, but also another reason is a lot of the money laundering that used to previously happen with other channels is now moving to these smaller professions, right? So similarly, around smaller financial players like your money services business, they are again very vulnerable to money laundering risks. There is a significant immigrant blue-collar worker population in Malaysia from other countries, nearby countries in Asia Pacific. So they are at the risk of being mules, and so that definitely remains a challenge. And third, which was again highlighted by both Michael and Vishal in their presentations, the siloed system. So just a couple of days back, I was talking to a large insurance company in Singapore. We were having again discussions on their AML-CFT programs. They have two lines of business. One is life insurance and second is general insurance, your property, car, and so on. They admitted, again, being in Singapore, one of the largest insurance companies there, they admitted they did not have a single view of the customer. So if a customer has, let's say, both a life insurance policy and an auto insurance policy, both of those policies could be administered differently. For both of those, the processes would be different. Potentially, risk identification would be different, which should not be the case. But unfortunately, in large organizations, that is something that we see as a continuous challenge. Siloed systems, disparate systems, which are not talking to each other.
And I think definitely it's not unique to insurance when it comes to this kind of siloed views, right? I think across financial institutions, you find similar challenges as well. So thank you for giving us a kind of rundown of what you feel the threats are. Ken, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest threats that's facing Malaysian financial institutions at the moment?
Well, good morning, everyone. Well, from my perspective, it's really a bit narrow. We look at, I mean, PayNet is currently managing the national fraud portal. So this is a very narrow part of the fraud spectrum where we only look at scams. And I maybe I give you some insights on the scams. I think in terms of the headlines, anti-money laundering, scams, fraud, these are it won't go away. This will be always the main, I guess, headline threats that will affect the financial industry. For scams, it has been around for the past, I would say, at least when it became a problem at least 3-4 years ago, and we do see the patterns are typically, if you look at it, there are many ways of classifying the type of scams. Every country may have a different way of naming them or categorizing them. But for Malaysia, I think we are beginning to see kind of the top 3 scams are always kind of rotating among, I guess the scammers are going to say, I'm going to try this now for this season or this period until everyone is more aware, and then I'll move on to some other type of scams. But I think it used to be job scams were quite rampant. At one point, there was the AKPK, the malware that hit the industry. I think, and some of you here are probably affected by that. And then they go on to go. I mean, the telco scam seems to be what we call Macau scams seems to be one of the mainstay of this scammers. They will use that because at the end of the day, I mean, the scammers are just using what I call capitalizing on the weakness, a human weakness. And we are all born with human weakness. Whether you're how smart you are weak in some areas. And what are the areas that potentially will let our guard down? I think the telco scam is always the fear, right? I'm the authority, and some you can't believe, you won't believe the stats that some are very educated people, but because they were so convinced with the story, then they fell for it. Then you have the greed. I think the greed one is probably one of the easier ones. When I promise you a return and I give you the return, you're so convinced. And every day in the newspaper, if you look at it, there's always one dedicated section on scams, and it's actually quite sad. Every time I read that, it's like, oh dear, this is quite sad, because sometimes life savings and large amounts investment scams are probably one of the also ongoing thing, and these are in my view at least what's happening in Malaysia.
But this is why I really like the panel that we have, because we have such diverse views, right? Because Rohit comes in from the AML CFT angle, Ken comes in from scam, frauds, and a very national level, and of course Azhar comes from the frontline level, right, where you actually deal with the consumers. From your vantage point, what do you see as the big threats that are facing our institutions?
Yeah, if let's say you look at the current situation, right? As long as we have customers who are naive, as long as we have customers or consumers who are basically they are very, what I call it, oblivious of the surroundings, right, and also the situation. And as long as they want money, and they are also in a situation where they need something, right? So they require some assistance. So with this kind of groups of customers, you will continue to see scammers actually coming and then approach them and then try to get something out of them. So at the end of the day, right, so it's about not just from the education point of view, right? You are educating the customer about how long actually you can educate the customers. Because at the end of the day, you have a group of customers who are vulnerable, right? So the elderly, right? So those actually retirees, right? And at the same time also those customers with low education, right? So you can continuously do your what I call it CSR, basically education, right, to this customer as CSR programs. But we need the change in both sides, right? So at both sides, in terms of customer themselves, they also need to get themselves to be educated in terms of knowing all these, what I call it, traits of scammers and how actually they scam. And of course, when we talk about money, right? That's where actually people will love to scam, right? So as long as something too good to be true, right? We give you 100% return, 200% return in 3 months. So in 1 month, that's where you can see actually the investment scam recently. Even the businessman, top businessman, also lost millions of ringgit actually because of that kind of scam. Then when it comes to another scam, right? So they are desperate, right? So people are desperate. They are desperate for money, right? So they are also being scammed because it is easy to take advantage of that situation. You are desperate, so I give you something, then you have to do something for me. For example, like the financing scam recently, where they actually apply for personal financing, and then they have to pay to the scammers, right? And then at the end already, they are stuck with the financing, and then they have to be declared bankrupt. The other part is basically talking about, yeah, so they're desperate also, but in a kind of desperation. They're desperate for love, right? So when they're desperate for love, they don't care about this, the partner actually being scamming them, right? So at the end of the day, they see that the person is not really the right person, right? So they are using different sort of platforms. Now actually you can see the deepfake AI, right? Actually you can actually previously we can see that actually CFO fraud, CEO fraud. Now it's no longer. It's now the whole management fraud, right? So you'll be able to see in that particular, let's say, video conferencing, right, the whole lineup of the management team speaking to you, but actually is AI, right? That happened to one of the banks here in Malaysia recently, where millions of ringgit was transferred, but luckily it was stopped before actually it's being done.
And it's so scary the extent that it's evolved, because I think the conversation has shifted from very small kind of scams, very consumer level scams, to more sophisticated ones, right? Because even in the US, I think a year or year ago, even without the use of AI, there was a credit union CEO that also fell for scams as well. So it's not necessarily the thinking where, okay, only certain susceptible populations are vulnerable to it, right? So there's a lot of good points that's brought up over there as well. Now, before we jump back to Rohit, while we're still on the point of scams and frauds, I think the PayNet fraud portal, if I remember correctly, was launched around August 2024. So you've had April 2024. So you've had more than a year already, right? What were some surprising insights? What were some surprising data that you found in that 1 year that you had in operations that weren't in your previous assumptions?
Well, in terms of surprises, actually, there weren't many, or there weren't real surprises, because what in a sense, surprised me was that the cooperation began to start and became everyone put their, everyone, as in all of you here, your colleagues, or even some of you who are accessing our national fraud portal, actually participated, and we saw a rise in the number of transactions being reported. With the system and everyone coming on board, just from April to December, it was a 70% increase in reported cases, and as such, we are helping basically more and more people. We also, maybe this is the surprise, is that when we used to report what's our recovery rate. Anyway, National Fraud Portal today in Malaysia is a recovery process, and we're trying to recover. We're yet to do preventive, but one day we will reach there. So while we are looking at recovery, normally what do you expect the recovery rate to be? And do you expect the pattern of the percentage of recovery you probably think, yeah, it's probably a partial, right? It's impossible that if you lose some money, you can get back everything, like maybe 10%, 20%, right? Just to share with you, actually, we had 20% success where 100% of the reported fraud or scam money was recovered. So that is actually very surprising.
No, it is because there was a time the expected percentage is 0.
Correct. There was no one helping. Yeah, and when we did, there was one stage where we didn't have the system. It was all more semi-automatic and manual. The recovery was only in between teens and things like that, but they're all partial. Yeah, you will never get back every 1 ringgit or every 100 ringgit. You will never get back 100 ringgit. So we saw. What was surprising is that 20% of those that we recovered were 100%. So which means what? We are faster than the scammers.
That's amazing.
We are faster than
actually
this.
pretty
I think that is one of the, I guess, the best surprise for us to say that, oh, actually we do have that 100% recovery. So the other surprising thing is none of the banks were complaining. They were all cooperating to the fullest where they can. And this is really I mean, you're talking about a social contribution of you guys are not just profit oriented. You are also there to help the rakyat as well. And this is one of the avenues where we can show everyone cooperating together with the PayNet, Bank Negara, the banks, the police, and everyone that was involved.
I mean, that's one area for banks where it's not adversarial at all. Because if anything, whichever participant that can help strengthen the trust in the system, it's a good thing for everyone, right?
Correct.
And again, Rohit, sorry, before we jump into you, there's another follow-up question because I'm very fascinated about the progress, right? So the other thing that you mentioned was the preventative aspect of it. What does that look like?
Okay. The preventive aspect, because we are the national payment switch and efficient payments is our bread and butter. We have to make sure when you do instant, it is instant, and we try not to introduce friction. So we are taking very careful steps to introduce scoring into the transaction, a risk score. I mean, how it might look like, okay? Possibly when one day all the transactions that any of your customers initiate will go through a risk scoring engine with the data that we have got and with the national fraud portal's mule database. Our national fraud portal have the entire country's mule account IDs in that database. With that, if you run through every transaction, let's say you want to make a payment from person A to person B, it goes through an engine that will score it. And I guess the vision is that this score will be given back to the respective banks based on your own risk appetite. You will decide whether you want to allow the transfer or send it back to a queue where possibly a fraud team or your customer service team will make a call to the customer. And that's the dream. But even then, there is going to be some problems where even you tell your customer that are you possibly in a scam, they will deny it and they will shoo you away. And that's where our neighboring country have a law that says if you don't agree to an authority's direction, they will come in and step in and block your account. So that is how things have.
So that's also a very interesting talking point that I want to jump into later because SPF is being tabled in the parliament to be able to freeze the accounts, right? Yes. So that's a big topic that I think we also want to jump into as well. But maybe just quickly jumping back to Rohit, and we spoke about the 5 million fines that were just announced yesterday across several banks, right? And I think it's clear, and everybody in this room probably can attest to the increased spending in technology, in compliance, in talent, to be able to prevent a lot of these failures and compliance challenges, right? But yet, a lot of studies and even statistics were saying that what the compliance cost has reached about over 40 billion. So why is it that at a time where financial institutions are increasing their focus, we are still seeing a rise in this kind of issues. And what can we do differently? Because, we can't be doing the same thing over and over again and still be getting the same outcomes, right?
Going back to that statistic that you mentioned, so we do an annual study on total cost of compliance.
Right.
So globally, that number is at around $200 billion.
So I am way under the actual number.
You are not wrong. Just that we have, I think, in our study, the cost of compliance for Asia Pacific is around $45 billion, and I definitely agree with you. That is a huge number, and that is essentially a cost to the business, so a barrier to doing business. There are several reasons for it. Just looking at it from the business environment perspective, and especially post-COVID and with the increasing digitalization, the volume of transaction itself has increased, right? So earlier, the number of transactions, especially the cross-border payments that used to happen, let's say 10, 15 years back, was significantly less. But now that has increased. Second, as Ken was pointing out, the velocity of those payments is also much faster. So now banks and financial institutions, they have to make sure that they are screening those transactions, they are putting in all the right checks and balances in place without impacting the customer experience. So you cannot have a transaction. So let's say a transaction on PayNet. Can you have a transaction that takes more than a few seconds? Probably not, right? That would be severely detrimental to the customer experience. So banks have to make sure they have to invest enough in technology so that that experience is not impacted. And third, even the types of scams or the types of challenges that banks used to face earlier, that has shifted a lot. So the typologies that we are seeing now, and as Michael started his slide, started his presentation, earlier mules were more of a money laundering problem. Now they are a fraud problem. So we are seeing that convergence of different risks, different challenges that were previously siloed, but now we are seeing all of that come together, which are now posing a challenge to the banks. Answer to that, to an extent, it is continue doing more of what they are already doing, which is investing in technology, investing in resources, making sure the processes are well defined and optimized. And then also making sure, again, events like this, bringing together the community, learning from each other, sharing best practices. I think all of that needs to be done at a larger scale. We have to stay not in lockstep with the criminals, but maybe one step ahead of them. So the work that Ken and the team are doing at PayNet is a fantastic example of what we need to do more of.
Amazing. I think it's so fascinating that convergence doesn't just happen on our side, right? It happens on that side too. So Azhar, I think you bring unique perspective being on the front line, dealing with the customers, your entire team, right? One question I have for you, and I think Rohit brought up a very good point about balancing the kind of convenience and security, friction and whatnot. But beyond that, I think there are user experiences that can be baked in that enhances security. Some examples that I can think of overseas, right? You think about Revolut, you think about Monzo. Certain transactions above certain amounts has to be approved by a second party. So let's say if my parent decide to, hey, I want to be putting 500,000 ringgit into this investment, I'm like, no, this is probably a scam. So there are a lot of examples. Then there are even like in-app calls, because there's so many phishing calls as well, right? So what are some things that we can do on the retail banking front, the user interface front, to really drive down this number, to really even not get involved with the PayNet fraud portal side and prevent it in the first place?
So the critical part is basically we need to make sure that the platform and the technologies are basically keeping in pace with the trends.
Yeah.
But not just keep in pace, but also not just about one step ahead. Right? It must be 10 steps ahead, right? So because the scammers they're very clever, right? So they will change their modus operandi at any point of time, right? So the critical part is basically to really look in terms of not just at the point of transaction, right? You will have a big data at the back, right? You use that big data. You look at in terms of how do you hyper personalize the transaction itself, right? And really look from that angle where you have different segments of customer, different profile, and different kind of transaction and different trend and patterns of spending. So from there, then actually you can actually build that sort of parameter in the system itself, in the fraud system, in the transaction system where you monitor that similar pattern. Of course, with the input from PayNet in terms of the details of the scoring actually will further help us really to really determine, right? Every transaction, is there any risk of fraud or not, right? So is there any risk of money laundering? And at the same time also, we have to also look at changing that kind of parameter on the fly, right? So it's not just about, okay, you come up with the parameters, 10 parameters by at the end already, right? So by tomorrow, that 10 parameters are no longer valid. So you have to keep changing that kind of parameters, and by utilizing the big data, really understand the patterns and build that model. When you have a consistent model, then actually you can curb the fraud, but you will not be able to eliminate
No, no,
the whole thing
certainly.
totally, right?
Certainly.
Yeah. So as long as actually you proactively look at those kind of trends, then you are at least helping the customer before the fraud actually happens.
Yeah. So I guess like to reframe my question to also add another dimension to it, I think data and all these kind of things, of course, are very crucial in that battle, right? Because I think a lot of times when I have conversations with bankers and we talk about how to better safeguard the consumers, they will say education, and the education that takes shape is it sometimes feels like a checklist that isn't exactly doing anything, an email or a pop-up in your app. My question is like, are we as an industry thinking deeply enough about contextual nudges that would actually help to lower this number instead of just having a checkbox? Hey, you know, I've educated my consumer in a certain way. Are you guys doing any thinking around that in Rajhi?
Yeah. So basically, the hyper personalization and also contextualized training and also communication to the customer are really important, right? So we always look from that kind of angle to really make sure that the customer really understand. Of course, it must be both sides, right? So you need two person to tango, right? So if you say the industry actually just doing everything in order to make sure that there's no scam, there's no fraud, but at the end, the customer actually the one actually, yeah, I just disregard all this, right? So I just click X because you see the button X because you don't want to read, right? Then of course we do have another layer. We will call you before the transaction going to happen, but actually it's not yet too late. But there's another layer where actually we put in, and then at the end of the day, there's an authorizer of that transaction who will decide with all the parameters, right? So whether you are actually positive uh, in that particular group or you are negative, right? So if let's say you're negative, yeah, the payment actually will go and then the transaction actually can happen. So at the end of the day, right? So the contextualized training and communication will have to happen on daily basis, regular basis to the customer to make sure that actually they are aware, right? And when they want to actually click on that button, right, they know what they are doing.
So let's shift gears a bit to talk about regulation from around the region. And I think we can look at it from AML's FATF point of view. We can also look at it from fraud and scam point of view, depending on what angle you want to come in, right? So maybe we will start with Rohit and give us a sense of the regulations around the region. Is it sufficient? What else is needed?
Sure. Again, I think going back to the earlier points that I made, the regulation has evolved in last 10-15 years quite a bit, and I would also acknowledge the role that FATF has been playing in that. So they have built a model framework of specific recommendations, specific outcomes that countries and then organizations need to look at, but that is not enough, right? And another one challenge that regulators and regulations face is that evolving nature of financial crime as well as fraud. So we need to keep evolving. So that is, I think that is a truism. So we need to keep evolving. We need to keep evolving at a much faster pace. And in terms of how we do that, I would say it is as much a matter of collaboration between different regulators within the region. Like Vishal pointed out earlier, Malaysia has done a fantastic job of bringing together regulators from other regions to build a common framework. I think that is very much required. So not just, let's say, within the ASEAN region, but Asia Pacific and across, because uh, whatever lens that you look at it from, whether fraud or financial crime, earlier it used to stay within the borders, but in today's world that goes beyond, right? So a lot of fraud, lot of financial crime happens across international borders, and technologies like cryptocurrency, they have not made it easier for regulators to track it. So we need to go beyond. The regulators need to work across different regions to bring together a comprehensive program around knowledge sharing, having a common framework for regulation, but also sharing data in real time. And third, I would say also bringing in the private entities like banks, like financial institutions, and working with them to see what are some of the challenges, or what are, let's say, new evolving patterns that they are seeing and how those might need to be addressed. So being on the toes all the time.
Yes.
I think that's rule of thumb in general, right? I think we have to constantly be alert. Ken, any comments, and particularly maybe some angles we can come in from? I think Singapore has, I guess, introduced a few regulations and potential frameworks. Right, one of it is the shared responsibility framework. One of it was the ability for SPF to, which is the Singapore Police Force, by the way, to freeze certain accounts. What do you think about these regulations? Do you think there are more regulations that need to come in place, and what should they look like?
I think in Malaysia, the banks are now expected to put in what you call it, perform more stringent. There's a criteria for them to perform in terms of all the transactions or the mobile banking transactions, where they need to check things like that, if there's any jailbreak or any of those malware signs in the phone. I think this they call it, I think, the fair treatment to the customers or consumers, is that they put in a responsibility on the banks to at least to check whether the phone there's any malware before you allow. I think that is the beginning of what we call passing the liability shift, basically. And if there's this, if you don't meet the criteria, it means you are liable. The banks are liable. So I think they puts some. I think there's some effort that the banks need to demonstrate that they are also part of the trying to help their customers to fight these scams. I think Malaysia don't have the other. I think there's this authorized push payments as well. The APP type of transactions where the customer is authorized, but actually from a scam transaction. I think the industry is currently in talks with. What I'm aware is that the industry is in talks with the central bank to, I think, come up with a framework. But I guess this is something I don't think the banks want to be fast in coming out with one, because it is essentially putting some liability back to the banks if they don't perform certain actions and control actions and so on. So but I think what I'm trying to say is we are quite different from Singapore also, in the sense that we haven't got the telco to be responsible as well. Yeah, but I believe we might not go there if our national fraud portal that we have today, which is very unique, if we manage to use this platform to really, I won't say eradicate, but at least to reduce the scams in the country, then possibly we don't have to go there. And so it's all the incentive for all of us to make sure we do our part and demonstrate to, I guess, the regulators that there are other ways. We don't need to copy other people. I think UK, they already put that whenever there's a scam on your customer, the banks will have to be liable. So that I don't see that coming so soon or at all, possibly because we are kind of different from the rest of the country. We have the National Fraud Portal, and indeed, just to share, there were at least, from my perspective alone, 30 to 40 inquiries around the world from central banks, from switches, trying to learn what we did. And actually, it's very unique. So I think we hope, or I sincerely hope, that we won't go the route of Singapore yet. But what has hit the market here in Malaysia is that for all those malware type of transactions, I think the liability is back on the bank unless you have done your necessary checks before the liability pass back to the customers.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think we should take pride in a lot of things that we do in Malaysia. I feel like those of us in the industry, we're deeply familiar. Sometimes people outside the industry, they think, oh, Malaysia's not, but we are doing a lot of amazing things, and I think we need to take stock and take pride in that for a moment. So, Azhar, what do you think about the regulatory landscape over here? Are there more we can do, things we can adopt, or?
When we talk about banks become liable, right? So for any fraud that has happened, that actually, of course, we have to look at whether the country is ready, right? So whether the industry is ready as well. The key part is, if let's say we look at the whole industry, we are working closely between one to another, right, to make sure that we have a common objective of eradicating this kind of scam. So up until unless we are no longer able to manage that, then probably the regulation have to come in terms of making sure the customers are protected. On our side at rajhi, we put customer as the first priority in terms of making sure that whatever that we are doing, right? So we put their needs actually at the forefront to ensure that the safety of the transaction is there. So you see the penalties by Bank Negara to multiple banks yesterday, right? So that actually, in a way, some kind of control to make sure that actually the banks are always keeping pace with the trends of money laundering, EML, scams, some of these things, right? So that at least really will cushion in terms of whether we really want to have a new set of law really to really impose to the industry itself. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your input. I think these days we cannot talk about anything at all without talking about AI. Whatever panel I'm in, whatever topic I'm talking about, whatever industry is in, AI is a conversation that has to come up, right? So, and it's evolving very, very quickly. So I guess what kind of new risks has emerged with the emergence of AI beyond the obvious, like Brad Pitt deepfaking, getting a few 100,000 from some lonely lady in UK? What kind of risk that's emerged from AI that is not immediately obvious to everyone in the room?
So, and you are absolutely right in the sense you cannot go to any room or talk to any person without talking about AI. And I think in a way AI is affecting every walk of the life. So not just fraud or scams or anything like that, but obviously keeping it topical, keeping it in the context of our discussion. There are a few new challenges that we see when we talk to our customers, which are financial institutions and non-financial institutions around the world. So one of the biggest challenge that we face, that we are seeing with AI, is obviously deepfakes. Deepfakes also include your synthetic identity, because what AI can do, so typically synthetic identity, it was, let's say a few years back, it was easier to detect that this is a fake ID or this is a synthetic identity. But what AI can do is it can combine data from the real world with some of, let's say, artificial imagined data to bring a very realistic identification to the game. right? So then it becomes very, very difficult to detect that it is a deepfake or it is a synthetic identity. So these identities have been used, and we are seeing real life examples, right? So these identities have been used to open fraudulent accounts, conduct scams, money laundering, and so on. And they can go undetected for months. That's the biggest challenge, right? Similarly, it is very easy to produce fake documents. So, and again, not just in terms of the identification, but fake invoices, for example. Trade-based money laundering is a big risk, and with Malaysia at the center of global trade, a lot of trade happens via Malaysia, via the ports, but also just being exports and imports for Malaysia. So trade-based money laundering is a big challenge, big concerns, and fake documentation in trade is definitely a big issue around invoices, bill of lading, all of that. That becomes a challenge. Third, something that I personally found very amusing and obviously very concerning was fraud is now being sold as a service. So, so on darknet, you can actually buy tools from scam, or let's say from developers who are not scamsters themselves, but they are developing and then selling those tools so that you can easily go out and conduct scams. So that is definitely very concerning. We talked about the example of a large bank in Malaysia falling victim to phishing and cloning, voice cloning kind of scam. So again, all of those things are making it very difficult for financial institutions, for regulators. Obviously, criminals are also using now AI to structure and layer their transactions. It becomes much more simpler or much more faster to do all of these things, so that the money laundering that is happening in the system stays undetected, and it can be done, let's say, in a much easier manner.
Rohit, if ever I need to stay awake for any reason at all, I'll be dropping you a call because I don't think I'll be sleeping well. Ken, any thoughts about AI and its impact
I,
and
I
whatnot?
think I think the impact of AI is very obvious. The autonomous scam agents. I think this is the risk that you are all going to face. Instead of human scammers trying to attack you, so to speak, they have a troop. They can literally have millions of people that can attack you at the same time using AI, and that's the scary part of it, that the intensity will increase, the sophistication will increase, and the ability to be more human-like in their interactions with possibly the victims and so on. So I think but that's not the end of the world. I think we as the defenders of scams and things like that will need to now embrace AI in your work. We are not. I think a lot of worries is that, oh, this is going to replace my work and things like that. Something is going AI is going to be more powerful than a human. I think the key thing is being to able to use that to further make your uplift your skills as well as your defense using AI, and that's my response. A simple response: you use AI to fight AI.
For sure, for sure. The scalability of it does terrify me, though. But as you said, it's not the end of the world. We do have the tools to fight back as well. Azhar, your thoughts?
Let's say you look at the scammers, right? They have unlimited resources, right? And of course with AI, even further resources in terms of how they can actually attack the customers. So what more important basically is to get ourselves to be educated, right? So we ourselves, even in the industry, right? So we are also learning on daily basis, right? What actually can be done, what actually new things being deployed out there, and you can see that a lot of what I call it scams nowadays. Basically, they are trying to manipulate you in a way that you don't even know that you are being manipulated, right? So deepfakes, right? So you hear the voice of your family members, right, calling you, and then you see the voice call, the video call is also the same video call, right? So What matters is basically at the end of the day, right, is about the consumer themselves. They have to be the one actually who's updating themselves in terms of what sort of technology, what sort of things, what sort of trends that actually happening right now, and how actually they can defend their own finances. And at the end of the day, you can see that the scam will never go down, right? And AI actually will keep getting more sophisticated, right? And the industry will have to spend more and more into all these platforms. So continuous, what I call it, improvement in terms of our fraud and also AML platform are really important to make sure that customers are protected. So industry will have to continuously spend and enhance the platform to make sure that actually it can be curbed to a certain level. Yeah.
I mean, just to add, and before we go to the questions from the audience, right? I think one thing that really terrifies me the most is that we are entering a generation where our children have their video and audio data out there way more than before, right? There's so many of that data on the TikToks, on the social media and whatnot, right? And it takes very little data to train, and there's way more than enough. And I recall there was a case in the US as well, where one grandfather was scammed. And the scam was very, very sophisticated, right? So the kidnapper said that, I have your daughter. The person did not believe, passed the phone, she's screaming, panicking. And at that moment of vulnerability, your senses are not there. You're not thinking this is possibly a scam. You're not taking any chances. And of course, he eventually parted with hundreds and thousands of dollars, right? So I think that's kind of the reality we live in, and a lot of consideration to think about what we can do. Now, moving on to one of the questions from the audience. The question is talking about initiatives that PayNet has done to inform and educate citizens about fraud fund recoveries, and I guess to counter the perception that there's nothing that can be done. I think that is also an important conversation as well.
Well, because we work very closely with the central bank, and the central bank has already got all the bank associations together to kind of promote the same messaging. Jangan kena scam and hashtag jangan kena scam and so on. So I mean, the reality is that there are people who also don't recover anything. It depends. It really depends on the timing. If the victim only is aware days, the moment you hit days after, and then you realize maybe this is a scam, then it's too late. So I think we're not saying we don't want to promote it. It is promoted, the 997 number. I think everyone knows that. So I think we have done what we think. I believe this is the right mix of awareness that we have done. We also don't want to give too much false hope. I think that's the thing. So I think all the banks are also required to also promote this number. And in fact, the 997 is just one of the channel. You actually can go back to your respective bank's customer service line, and that's available, supposed to be 24/7 now. So I think that's because they are trained also to be connected to our fraud portal. So the only thing is that today the industry is only giving resources from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there is a gap where from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. These are actually not there's no one looking at it to block, because I mean the direction today is just let's try our best to 8 a.m. But there's no promise that they will not extend to 24/7. So I guess I think the awareness has already been done. We have done that. I think in the 1.5 years ago, that was a whole blast. There was a coordinated effort, and everyone was just sending the same message. So
maybe I can try to frame the question a little bit better to reflect the intent, right? Because I think yes, there's a lot of initiative to promote 997 jangan kena scam. I think the general public is aware of that.
Yeah.
I think the intent of the question is that sometimes maybe the consumers don't even bother to call because they feel like it's hopeless. Like why should I call if I don't get my money back at all, when the reality is there is a chance,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I guess you come from the angle, yes, there has to be a balance, but do you think that there should be at least some success cases that shared out there?
Personally, yes, it sends, but it also sends a message to the scammers and say, "Hey, I'm slower now. What am I going to do?" So there's also this dilemma. But yes, I do. I think most of the victims, I think, just generally, the stats is that only 1 out of 5 will report, lah, really. We can improve that number. What we're trying to say is if you shout out too much, then becomes the scammers are, oh, this is a natural fraud portal, let's see how we can be faster and things like that also. I think so. We are trying to balance that.
Certainly. I'm sure you guys are spending a lot of time thinking about how to get more people reporting as well. Thanks for that insight. If there aren't any other questions from the audience, let's move on to closing thoughts. It's a huge topic, right? I'm sure there are things that you wanted to talk about that's important that we haven't already covered. So maybe now we'll start with Azhar, we'll go to Ken, and we'll go back to Rohit to do the closing thoughts. Azhar, anything you want to add?
Yeah, as long as we have people who are vulnerable, people who are greedy, people who are basically desperate, scam will always happen. Yeah, so it is important for every single one of us, right, as a consumer or as actually industry, right, as an industry, to really look at in terms of how do we protect ourselves and work together, right? So not just among us, but also with cross industries as well. Because also you see corporate customers are also being scammed. So that's where we are also doing hyper personalized and contextualized training to SME and also corporate customers to make sure that they really understand what they need to do, and then they have to see the patterns as well in terms of transaction, what sort of patterns they need to know, and how to combat that kind of fraud. So that also happening on our side, together with the improvement in terms of systems and parameters regularly. But at the end of the day, again, coming back to that group of customers, as long they are vulnerable customers, they'll always be scammed.
Ken?
Yeah. So I just want to share with everyone. So our journey in our National Fraud Portal, today we have a platform, everyone cooperate, and we do fundraising very effectively today. Possibly around 15 minutes delay. Hopefully we can achieve a much more real time to that. So I talked about the future, which is basically fraud prevention and risk scoring. But what we are doing now is that we are going to use the machine learning and the data that we have to help you detect some of the mule accounts that you did not detect. So because we can see from a network view, the view that you cannot see, so we will provide you as well intel on possible mule accounts that has yet to be detected by your system, and hopefully we can all work together to further reduce the what I call the ingredient for scams, which is mule accounts. So when we reduce it, hopefully they get out of business and they move elsewhere. Other areas, I think we are working also with the compliance networking group people. I think under the eKYC, you all possibly may want to share not just the mule ID. Now is the faces of the mules or the scammers, fake IDs, a real name, possibly a real face, but although now with deepfake and things like that, we don't know whether this is really real. But at least we have a database of those bad hats. And then when you onboard them under the eKYC process, you can also check that. That's something we have been talking to some of the banks on providing this service to you. We are exploring the telco side. I think some of you may want to know the SIM with the phone phone number, what ID is that person, in order for you to double check whether is it the same customer. And I think the other frontier is really because of our corridors that we open and we connect cross-border today. We are seeing some of the big scams, or rather the funds from the scams moving overseas as well. So cross-border cooperation is something we will be looking at from the switch level, and maybe possibly getting the central banks involved. This is over and above whatever the Interpol cooperation that we already have. Yeah.
Gives me a little bit of hope. Rohit?
Yep. And so Azhar and Ken obviously talked about more future-looking stuff. I'll take a step back. I'll go back to the basics. So and I get a lot of this, especially for you, even from my family. So they did not understand what money laundering is or why it is important, and they will always question me on that. But I think their awareness is now definitely improving. But going back to the basics, a lot of people think, a lot of common person thinks that money laundering does not have anything to do with me. It is not a problem that I should be thinking about, that I should be aware of. But that is obviously not the case. Money laundering affects each and every one of us. So not typically, money laundering almost always happens when there is a predicate offense preceding it. And obviously frauds are one of that, but it goes beyond that. There are other criminal activities, drug trafficking, wildlife trafficking, human trafficking, kidnapping, corruption, all of that. Those are the activities that precede money laundering. So whenever you see something related to money laundering, be aware that it is affecting you, and be aware that how you can help stop that money laundering from happening. Obviously, not be a mule, be more educated about things. So I think that is one thing that we need to definitely take care of. Also, keep educating ourselves, keep educating others. That is, I think, the only way, or the most important way, how we can solve this problem.
Sometimes money laundering affects you in ways you don't even expect. Like, personally, I've had money remitted to my account that has been stopped in the past because there's a politician named Vincent Fong in the US as well. So there are different ways it affects you, right? There's friction and user experience and whatnot. But, gentlemen, it's been such a pleasure. I have so many more questions, but I am conscious that we don't have all day. With that, can we please have a round of applause for the panelists?